Welcome to this week's episode. This week the students figured out what the battery drain problem was on that Ford truck. The Nova body gets its final coats of primer. We begin a quarter panel replacement section on a Honda, and this Honda is just about ready for its test drive. Thanks for tuning in.
After removing the interior fuse box, we saw that there was some corrosion near the bulkhead connectors. While pulling the fuse box apart, we saw there was more corrosion, and since we know that the customer is going to need a new fuse box, we cut a little window to show you how bad it is. Now we are going to reinstall this fuse box as the customer needs to drive the vehicle home. When we install the new one, we're going to destroy this one to show you the extent of the damage.
I'm grinding the fiberglass to shape to prepare for a layer of body filler. Now that the repairs are made, I'm ready for the final coats of primer.
Alejandro begins by spraying over the repaired areas, then he'll do an overall spray of the body. This is a starter from an old Formal Cub tractor. I've got a new starter drive to put in it. I've actually had it for quite some time, just now getting around to putting it together. The complaint with it was when you go to crank the engine over, it would crank fine and it would hit like it was going to start, but then the starter would disengage. It was actually disengaging too soon, so then the engine wouldn't continue running. Normally, a lot of times it's an ignition issue that'll cause that, but we're pretty confident that everything ignition-wise and even fuel-wise is okay in this tractor, as it will run. So it has to be a weak spring on the starter drive. It's disengaging it a little too soon. So we're going to replace the starter drive in it, get it all back together, and then we'll take it back to the guy and put it on his tractor. When working with some of this older stuff, it's important to make sure you're ordering and getting the correct drive. So I took a caliper and measured the diameter across the teeth, as well as the length, because that's some of the questions that they'll ask you. There was a couple of different versions of starter drives for this particular starter, as it fit different tractor models. A lot of times there'll be a snap ring up here holding the drive in place on the shaft, but in this particular one it's the housing itself that retains it, so there is no snap ring. However, there is a thrust washer here. We need to make sure that that does go back on as we're putting it back together. You see our new starter drive has these lock tabs here for the bolts. That's going to keep them in place due to the high torque from the starter. And if you look down through there where it goes on the shaft, you can see the bolts actually protruding through. So we're going to loosen these up, pull them out through. When we put it on the shaft, we'll get both these bolts tightened in place and then flip the lock tabs over, and that's what's going to keep it locked to the shaft. But first we have to remove the old one. You can see I've already got one of the lock tabs from the old starter drive pushed over, and now I'm finishing up this one here using a chisel, lightly tapping it over, just enough so we can get the bolt out, get a socket on the bolt. Alright, so that should be good there. So now we'll get a socket on here, loosen up both of these, pull the drive off, put the new one on. Got the old shaft off and out of the way. You can see our lock key there and the hole where that one bolt goes. So we're going to put the new drive on, lining up our groove with the key so we can get that pressed on there. It's offering a little bit of resistance, but that's what we want. Make sure the bolts are backed out all the way, and they seem to be. So let's give it a little tap. There we go. So we need to get that driven on until we can get this bolt through that hole. The new drive is on. I've got this bolt in through the hole that's in the shaft. So now what I'm going to do is take this one, I'm going to take the drive and get it lined up with the end of that spring, and then we will tighten this one down. Okay, now with that seated, we're going to take and bend both these lock tabs up on these two flats. So with the starter drive in place and both bolts there, we're going to fold up these tabs, and I think the easier way to do it is to use some locking pliers and just keep sneaking up on it. I don't think you can see it. Let me see if I can go this way and you guys can see it. I'll just take and use this flat side of the bolt on the opposite side, and then we can bring that lock tab right up against there, as you can see, and that's going to keep it locked in place. Now our thrust washer goes back on the end. Then we can start putting the housing back together. Now you always want to make sure that you take the pictures of these things and remember how they come apart, because this one's been apart for a little bit. But this one has a tab here for that pin, so that way I can't put it together incorrectly, because it could go two different ways except for that pin. So we'll get this back together and lined up there, like so. Alright, and then we'll get our bolts back in, the back part of the housing, and like I said, that'll finish it off and we can test it. We have a 95 Honda Del Sol that we're replacing a few panels on. This belongs to one of the senior students. So we've got it masked off with exactly where we're going to make our cut to make a little window. He does have a replacement section to weld into it. So we're going to show you how we're going to do that with these different sections on the car, but we're starting with this one. With the window cut, what we're going to do now is take and grind this edge a little bit so we can pull this piece out. We don't want to make the cut all the way through into the wheel well, because we want the inner piece, which structurally is still sound, we're going to reuse that. So we don't want to cut the entire section out, which is what a lot of people do, but then that allows water to leak inside the panel and it'll make it rust again, so we want it to stay sealed up. With that piece out of the way, we can see that the inner structure is also rusted, so we're going to try to fix that as well. But for right now, we're going to remove this tape, then we're going to take a piece of manila envelope and make a template, like a puzzle piece, to fit perfectly in that hole, and then we're going to cut the new section the exact same shape to put in there and weld in place. So what he has now is a piece of manila envelope over top of the repair area, and he's going to use his fingers to press to make a mark onto the paper, so then he can cut that, and that'll be the size and the shape of the repair that he needs. See, that mark is coming out real nice. Alright, so you see he's got a nice mark there that he can use. He's going to pull this off and take scissors and cut that shape, and then we can work on the bottom line, and then that'll get transferred over to the new piece to make the exact puzzle piece shape that we need to make this repair. So after cutting the template, we put it over top of the replacement section and then traced it. You can see the line there. So what he's going to do now is cut that line, so then we'll have the exact puzzle piece that we need to fit into the quarter.
The quarter panel and the repair piece are ready to weld in.
I didn't show you this before we welded in the new panel, but if you can see that green area there, that's the inner piece from that quarter section. So whoever cut that out did a really good job, and we were able to put that over top of the original. So now all we have to do is put a couple of tack welds on that inner piece to the new section, and then we can undercoat it, and that'll protect it for a very long time.
We're installing the 8 converter bolts.
Dylan is rotating the crankshaft so he can easily access the flex plate and torque converter bolts. Once they get them all started, they will begin torquing them.
We're torquing the converter bolts to 105 inch-pounds.
Here the crankshaft is held while the bolts are being torqued.
Our next step is to install the half shafts.
While tightening the sway bar link through the lower control arm, the knuckle was spinning inside. So what normally you would do is hold the stud with an Allen wrench on that inside and then tighten the nut with a wrench. But what Dylan's going to do is hold the nut and then put an Allen wrench on an impact gun and reverse it so it pulls itself through. Just like that.
Next, I'm installing the ECM. We're installing the alternator next.
Do it again. With the axle nut torqued, he's going to push the nut ring into that groove in the axle, and that's what locks it in place. Now the core support goes in. Then the hood latch. With the airbox going in, we're getting much closer to starting the car. Next time on Bulldog Builds, we should have the Civic wrapped up and taken for a test drive. The new fuse box should be in for that Ford truck and hopefully take care of that battery drain. And we'll have this quarter section finished off and begin with the repair on the other side. See you next week.